The letter sat half-finished on the rough pine table, lamplight pooling around the inkwell and making shadows dance across words that promised freedom and flight. A berth on the coastal trader Mercy's run departing in 3 weeks. A wheelwright's wages in a city where no one knew his father's debts or the weight of land that crushed a man instead of feeding him. Declan Emerson set down his pen and rubbed eyes that ached from squinting at cramped script. The barn owl calling somewhere in the darkness beyond the window, and tried to imagine mornings that smelled of salt instead of cow dung and failure. The farm sprawled around him in the June night. 40 acres of rocky soil and timber that his father had mortgaged twice before the fever took him, leaving Declan with a deed that felt more like a sentence and creditors who smiled with teeth when they came calling. He was 24 years old, strong-backed and skilled with wood and iron, and every practical bone in his body said to walk away, to let the bank have the land and start fresh, where a man could build something that belonged to him instead of to ghosts and debt collectors. Sleep came hard that night, full of half-dreams where the road unwound toward blue water and the barn roof collapsed in a crash of rotten timber. He woke before dawn out of habit, pulled on work clothes that smelled of sweat and sawdust, and went out into the gray light to survey the wagon sitting cockeyed in the yard. The rear axle had cracked yesterday afternoon while he was hauling fence posts from the North 40, and now the whole contraption listed like a drunk, useless, until he could forge a replacement. He ducked into the workshop behind the house, selected the broken axle where it leaned against the wall, and hefted it onto his shoulder. The forge was cold, would take an hour to heat properly, but he could at least measure the thing and cut stock for the repair. The path took him past the barn, that massive weathered structure his grandfather had raised from local oak, and in the stillness before the world woke, he heard a voice inside, low and careful, shaping words he knew as well as his own name. "I take thee to be my wedded husband, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better for worse, for richer for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death us do part." A pause, then the same words again, slower, with the cadence of someone learning a difficult lesson. Declan stopped, the axle heavy on his shoulder, and listened. The voice was female, unfamiliar in its hesitance but somehow known, and his chest did something complicated when he realized it was Petra Darkwell speaking the old vows in the barn's dusty shadows. She had appeared 4 months ago walking up the road from town, green-skinned and tired, a canvas pack on her back and enough silver to pay 2 months' room and board if he would let her sleep in the barn and work for her keep. An orc woman alone on the frontier roads was either desperate or dangerous, and Declan had been practical enough to take the coins and point her toward the ladder to the hayloft. She worked like 3 men. That was the simple truth of it. In 4 months, she had repaired every fence on the property, cleared the drainage ditch that had been clogged since his father's time, patched the chicken coop so the foxes stopped getting in, and organized the chaotic mess of his workshop into something approaching efficiency. She spoke little, moved with economical grace, and asked for nothing beyond the barn space and plain meals. He paid her what he could, small coins that felt inadequate for the labor she provided, and tried not to wonder too much about why a woman with her competence and strength hired herself out to a failing farm instead of finding steadier work in the settlements north, where orc labor crews commanded good wages. Now she was in his barn practicing wedding vows in the dark before dawn, and the only possible explanation made his stomach drop toward his boots. The axle grew heavier. He should move, should either announce himself or walk away, but his feet had grown roots and the voice continued, patient and determined. For richer for poorer, in sickness and in health. A longer pause. He heard the rustle of paper, pictured her bent over some borrowed book, her blunt fingers tracing words by lantern light. To love and to cherish, till death us do part. The pronunciation was perfect now, each word clear and round. She was good at this, at learning things, at solving problems with the same methodical focus she brought to fixing broken fences. His mind raced through possibilities. He had never seen her walk out with anyone from town, never heard her mention family or attachments, but maybe there was someone, some man she met on her days off when she disappeared into the village with her wages. Maybe she had been planning this all along, working his farm to save money for a wedding, for a life that had nothing to do with him or his inherited mess of debts and dying dreams. The thought bothered him more than it should. He barely knew her. They worked in companionable silence most days, shared meals where she ate with focused efficiency and thanked him with brief courtesy, existed in the same space without ever really talking about anything that mattered. She was his hired hand. He was planning to abandon this place in 3 weeks. What she did with her personal life was none of his concern. He shifted the axle, making noise deliberately, and her voice cut off mid-word. By the time he reached the barn door, she was emerging with a water bucket in each hand, her face composed and unrevealing. In the growing light, he could see her clearly. Green skin with an undertone of sage, small tusks that barely showed when her mouth was closed, dark hair pulled back in a practical braid, pointed ears pierced only by the holes where earrings might once have hung but did not now. She wore work clothes like his, canvas trousers and a linen shirt faded from many washings, and stood perhaps 5.5 feet tall with the lean muscle of someone who worked hard and ate carefully. "Early start," she said, her voice level and giving nothing away. "Broken axle," he said, lifting his shoulder slightly under the weight. "Needs replacing before I can use the wagon." She nodded, already moving past him toward the well. "I will finish mucking the stalls after I water the stock. The chickens are fed." He watched her go, efficient and self-contained, and wondered if he had imagined the whole thing. But no, his ears worked fine, and there was a worn book sitting on the hay bale just inside the barn door, spine cracked and pages soft with handling. He did not go look at it. That would be prying, and whatever she was planning, whatever life she was building in the margins of his dying farm, she deserved her privacy. The forge took his attention for the next few hours, the familiar rhythm of heating and hammering iron into useful shapes, measuring twice and checking the straightness with a practiced eye. The sun climbed, burning off the morning cool, and sweat soaked through his shirt by the time he had the new axle shaped and fitted. He was adjusting the final alignment when Petra appeared with a jar of cold tea and 2 tin cups, her own shirt darkened with sweat across the shoulders. "Break," she said, pouring without asking if he wanted any. They sat in the shade of the workshop, drinking in silence, and he caught himself watching her from the corner of his eye. She had a smudge of dirt on her jaw, calluses on her palms thick as boot leather, and she drank the tea in long swallows like someone who had learned not to waste time on unnecessary pauses. There was something restful about her, something that asked nothing and gave what was needed, and he realized with a small shock that he would miss her when he left. The farm would go to the bank, and she would have to find other work, and that book of vows would carry her toward whatever future she had planned. "The Hendersons are getting married," she said suddenly, breaking the silence. "Samuel and Mary Whitfield, 2 weeks from Saturday." He blinked, searching his memory. Tom Henderson's boy, the tall one who cannot read, that one. She set down her cup and stretched her shoulders, rolling out the stiffness of hard labor. "He is terrified of the vows." afraid he will stumble over the words and shame himself in front of the whole settlement. Understanding crept in slowly, then all at once, and Declan felt heat that had nothing to do with the forge climb up his neck. So you are learning them, to teach him, line by line. He is not stupid, just never had schooling. He can memorize anything if someone speaks it to him enough times. She looked at him directly, her dark eyes calm and faintly amused. You heard me this morning. It was not a question. He nodded, feeling foolish and relieved in equal measure. I thought that I was planning my own wedding. The amusement grew more visible, crinkling the corners of her eyes. To whom? The chickens. They are already committed to the rooster, he laughed, surprised by how much lighter his chest felt. Seemed unlikely. But people do not usually practice wedding vows alone in barns unless they have a reason. Now you know the reason. She stood, collecting the cups. Samuel comes by in the evenings after his work. We go through it until he can say it in his sleep. His Mary deserves a wedding where her husband does not faint from nerves. It was a kindness, simple and uncomplicated, and exactly the sort of thing he should have expected from her. She fixed broken things. That was what she did, whether it was fences or ditches or terrified young men who needed help reading words that would bind them to the people they loved. He went back to the axle feeling obscurely better about the world, and when evening came and he saw Samuel Henderson's lanky form walking up the road toward the barn, he stayed in the house and gave them privacy for the lesson. The next morning he woke with the letter still unfinished on the table, and 3 weeks ticking down to a deadline. He was no longer certain he wanted to meet. The farm needed 100 things, most of which required money he did not have, and every practical calculation said to cut his losses and run. But that morning, he found himself watching Petra work, noticing things he had overlooked in the daily grind of survival. She did not just fix the fences, she improved them, angling the posts to shed water and adding cross braces that would hold for a generation. She did not just patch the chicken coop, she redesigned the roost so the birds had better airflow and protection from predators. Everything she touched became more than it had been, and when he looked around the farm he saw her fingerprints everywhere, quiet competence making order from chaos. At breakfast, eating the porridge she had cooked because he tended to burn it, he asked the question that had been bothering him for months. Why here? You could get steady work with the timber crews up north, better pay, a real bunk instead of a hayloft. She ate 3 more bites before answering, chewing thoughtfully. The crews are all men. They work hard and drink harder. I did that for 2 years and saved every penny, but the foreman started making suggestions about how I could earn bonuses. Her voice stayed level, but something cold moved behind her eyes. When I refused, my bunk caught fire one night. No one saw who did it. Hell. The word came out flat and angry. You could have died. Could have, did not. I left before the next accident could happen and went looking for work that came with fewer strings. She scraped the last of her porridge and set the bowl down with careful precision. You needed help. You had room in the barn and you asked no questions and made no suggestions. That is worth more than an extra few silvers a week. It shamed him somehow that the bare minimum of human decency felt like a gift to her. I am glad you came here, he said, and meant it more than he expected. This place would have fallen apart months ago without you. She looked at him for a long moment, measuring something. It is still falling apart, just slower. That was true enough. The creditors would come due in November, and unless he found a miracle or a silver mine under the north pasture, the farm was lost. He had accepted that, had made his peace with walking away, but now the idea sat heavier in his gut. Walking away meant leaving her to find another situation, another barn, Another place where men might make suggestions and start fires when she refused. "Have you thought about what you will do?" he asked. "After, when this place goes to the bank, find another farm, there is always work." She said it like it was simple, like the world was full of places that would be safe, and he wanted to believe her but could not quite manage it. The days rolled past, each one bringing small moments that accumulated weight. He watched her teach Samuel Henderson in the evenings, her patience infinite as the young man stumbled through phrases and started over, her voice steady with encouragement. He saw the way Samuel's shoulders straightened when he finally got a section right, how pride lit his homely face, and understood that Petra was giving him more than words. She was giving him confidence, the belief that he could stand in front of his community and speak his love aloud without shame. One evening, 10 days before the wedding and 13 before the ship sailed, Declan found himself walking to the barn after supper. Samuel had left an hour ago, full of gratitude and clutching his hat, and Petra was forking fresh hay into the stalls. She looked up when he entered, one eyebrow raised in silent question. "I was thinking," he said, feeling awkward and young, "that if you are teaching him human vows, maybe I should learn the orc ones, in case I ever need them." Her expression shifted, something surprised and pleased flickering across her face before she schooled it back to neutrality. "You plan to marry an orc woman?" "No, maybe. I do not know." He shrugged, trying to look casual and probably failing. "Just seems like useful knowledge for understanding how things are done." She studied him, then set aside the pitchfork and gestured to a hay bale. "Sit. The orc vows are shorter than the human ones but harder to say. They require you to mean them. Do not the human ones require that too, in theory? But humans make promises with their mouths. Orcs make them with their breath and blood." She sat across from him, close enough that he could see the fine texture of her skin, the small scar above her left eyebrow. "The words are old. They come from when clans lived in the mountains and every winter killed the weak. Marriage was survival, two people choosing to stand together against everything that wanted them dead." It sounded brutal and beautiful, and he leaned forward without meaning to. "Teach me." She spoke in her own language first, the syllables harsh and rhythmic, then translated. "I bind my breath to yours. Where you go, I follow. What threatens you threatens me. Your hunger is mine, your shelter is mine, your fight is mine, until the last fire goes cold and the bones lie quiet." The words raised goosebumps on his arms. There was nothing soft in them, no poetry about love or cherishing, just stark commitment stripped to its essential core. "That is beautiful," he said quietly. "Frightening but beautiful. It is meant to be both. Marriage should be." She watched him with an intensity that made his pulse jump. "Now you say it. I will correct the pronunciation." They worked through the phrases as the light faded, and the barn filled with blue shadows, her voice patient as she had been with Samuel. His tongue awkward around sounds English did not make. She laughed once when he mangled a vowel badly, a genuine laugh that transformed her face from merely attractive to something that stole his breath, and he found himself working harder just to hear that sound again. "Better," she said finally, when he had stumbled through the whole thing twice. "You learn quickly. I have a good teacher." He meant it, and she ducked her head slightly, accepting the compliment. They sat in the gathering dark, and he did not want to leave, did not want to go back to the house, and the half-finished letter and the decision that felt more wrong every day. "Petra," he said, and she looked up, waiting. "What would you do if you had a chance to start completely over? Clean slate, no history, just possibilities." She considered the question seriously, as she did everything. "I would find a piece of land and build something that lasted. A workshop, maybe, or a stable. something that made useful things and could not be taken away by men with suggestions. Not a farm. Farms are good if you like farming. I like building, fixing things, making broken pieces fit together into something strong. She looked around the barn at the solid beams and the stalls she had repaired. This place has good bones. If someone wanted to change the purpose, it could be something excellent. An idea stirred in the back of his mind, formless and fragile. Change it how? There is a timber road 3 miles east. It runs all the way to the northern forests and back to the valley settlements. Wagons are always breaking down, wheels cracking, axles failing. You are a wheelwright. This barn is big enough for a proper workshop, with room for storage and sales. You could serve every wagon that passes through, and make better money than scratching a living from rocky soil. The idea took shape as she spoke, and he saw it suddenly. The barn transformed into a workshop, wheel rims hung on the walls, the smell of fresh cut wood and hot iron, a steady stream of customers instead of the grinding isolation of subsistence farming. That would take capital, he said slowly. Tools, materials, advertising. I am already in debt. Debt can be managed if the business is sound. The timber trade is not going anywhere. The valley is growing, needs more wagons, more wheels, more repairs. She looked at him directly, her eyes dark and serious. But it would mean staying. Committing to this place instead of running from it. The words hit harder than she probably intended, and he flinched slightly. How did you know I was thinking of running? You have the look. I have seen it before. People who measure distances and count coins and plan escape routes. She said it without judgment, just observation. I do not blame you. This place is hard and you did not choose it, but running does not always solve the problems you carry. She was right, and he hated that she was right, and he loved that she saw him clearly enough to say it. The letter on the table suddenly felt like a coward's way out, abandoning the only thing his father had left him because it was difficult. But staying meant more debt, meant begging creditors he barely trusted, meant risking everything on a plan that could fail and leave him worse than before. I would need help, he said, not quite admitting anything. Someone who knows how to manage a workshop, how to keep things organized. You have someone like that. She said it matter-of-factly, but he heard the offer underneath. If you pay fair wages. I would pay more than fair if the business works. He rubbed his face, feeling the day's beard rasp under his palms. I need to think about this. Think then. But decide soon. Summer will not wait, and neither will the creditors. He went back to the house that night and sat at the table with the letter mocking him in the lamplight. The ship would sail with or without him, would find another wheelwright to fill the berth, and the world would continue turning. Petra's plan was risky and ambitious, and required him to convince people who already mistrusted orcs that a partnership with her was sound business. It required him to believe in himself and this land, and the possibility of building something new from the ruins of his father's dreams. He picked up the pen, dipped it in ink, and wrote a new letter. This one went to Marcus Brennan, who owned the largest freight company in the valley and owed Declan's father a favor from years past. He laid out the plan in careful detail, asked for an extension on the existing debt, and a small loan to purchase initial materials, promised repayment from the workshop's earnings. It was a gamble that could ruin him, but it felt more honest than running. The next morning he showed the letter to Petra over breakfast. She read it slowly, her lips moving slightly over the more complicated words, then looked up with something fierce and approving in her expression. This could work, she said. It has to work. Otherwise I am worse than bankrupt. I am an idiot. You are not an idiot. She folded the letter carefully and handed it back. You are scared, which is different. Fear means you understand the stakes. He sent the letter that afternoon with the mail coach, and the waiting began. The days until the Henderson wedding ticked down, and he threw himself into farm work with renewed focus, seeing the property through new eyes. The barn would need interior modifications, better lighting, a proper forge area, storage racks for lumber. The house could stay as living quarters. The south field might be sold off if he needed additional capital, or leased for grazing. Piece by piece the vision assembled itself, and he caught himself getting excited in a way he had not felt since before his father died. Petra worked beside him, and the easy silence between them filled with something warmer, something that made his skin tingle when their hands brushed passing tools. He noticed small things, the way she hummed tunelessly when she concentrated, how she always checked on the animals before she ate her own meals, the careful way she folded her spare shirt and laid it beside her bedroll. She was precise and thoughtful, and he began to understand that her silences were not cold but simply economical, words used when they had purpose. Samuel Henderson came every evening, and his confidence grew visibly. By the week before the wedding he could recite the vows forward and backward without hesitation, and his gratitude when he shook Petra's hand was so earnest it made Declan's throat tight. "I cannot repay you for this," Samuel said, his young face red with emotion. "You have given me a gift I will carry forever. You repay me by treating Mary well," Petra said firmly, "by speaking those words and meaning them every day after. I will. I swear I will." Samuel looked at Declan, then back to Petra. "You both should come to the wedding. Everyone is invited, but I am inviting you special. You should be there to see it work." Petra hesitated, and Declan saw the calculation in her eyes. An orc woman at a human community wedding, the stares and whispers, the risk of conflict. Before she could decline politely, he stepped in. "We will be there," he said. "Honored to attend." Samuel beamed and shook both their hands again before loping off into the twilight, and Petra turned to Declan with one eyebrow raised. "I do not need you fighting my battles," she said mildly. "Not fighting your battles. Just accepting a wedding invitation." He met her eyes, stubborn. "He wants us there. We should go. People will talk. People always talk. Let them." He surprised himself with the vehemence, but he meant it. She had worked herself to exhaustion for a stranger's happiness, and if the community could not manage basic courtesy in return, then the community could go hang. She studied him for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "All right, we go together." The wedding was held in the open meadow between the Henderson farm and the Whitfield property. Half the settlement gathered under a blue August sky. Someone had built a simple arbor from birch branches, and Mary Whitfield stood beneath it looking radiant in a dress her mother had sewn from saved cloth. Samuel waited beside her, scrubbed and nervous in his best clothes, and when the justice of the peace asked him to speak his vows, the whole crowd went silent. Declan stood near the back with Petra beside him, and he felt the attention shift when people noticed her, the ripple of awareness and judgment. She stood very straight, her face composed, wearing the cleanest of her work clothes because she owned nothing finer, and he moved a half-step closer so their shoulders nearly touched. A statement, if anyone cared to read it. Samuel opened his mouth, and for one terrible second, Declan thought the boy would freeze, would forget everything Petra had taught him. Then Samuel looked at Mary, really looked at her, and the words came out clear and strong. "I, Samuel James Henderson, take thee, Mary Elizabeth Whitfield, to be my wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death us do part." Mary's eyes shone with tears, and she spoke her own vows with a voice that shook only slightly. And when the justice pronounced them married, the whole meadow erupted in cheers and applause. Declan glanced at Petra and saw her smiling, a small private smile of satisfaction, and his chest ached with something he was not quite ready to name. The celebration afterward involved food and music and dancing, neighbors bringing dishes and drink to share, and Declan steered Petra toward the tables before anyone could make them unwelcome. Samuel found them there, Mary on his arm, both of them glowing. "Thank you," Samuel said again, gripping Petra's hand. "I would have shamed myself without you." "You did perfectly," Petra said, and Mary stepped forward impulsively and hugged her, a quick, fierce embrace that left Petra looking startled and touched. "Thank you for giving him confidence," Mary said. "He has been so worried and you made it possible." Not everyone was so welcoming. Declan saw the looks, heard the muttered comments from some of the older farmers who thought orcs had no place at human celebrations. He was ready to ignore it, to smile and deflect and get through the afternoon without incident, but then George Thatcher stepped into their path with whiskey on his breath and meanness in his eyes. "Surprised to see your kind here," Thatcher said, looking at Petra. "Thought orcs did not care much for human ceremonies." "I care about people keeping their promises," Petra said evenly. "The ceremony is just words. Keeping the words matters. Big talk from someone squatting in Emerson's barn. You paying rent or just spreading your legs for room and board?" The insult hung in the air like poison, and Declan moved without thinking, putting himself between Thatcher and Petra. "Apologize. Now, why should I? Everyone knows what orc women are good for, and it is not farming." Thatcher grinned, ugly and confident. "You rutting her, Emerson. That why you keep her around?" Declan's fist caught him in the mouth before he planned it, a solid right cross that sent Thatcher stumbling back into the food table. Dishes crashed, someone screamed, and then Tom Henderson was there with two other men, hauling Thatcher upright and away. "That is enough," Tom said sharply. "George, you are drunk and stupid. Go home and sober up before you make this worse." Thatcher spat blood and glared murder at Declan, but he let himself be pulled away, still muttering curses. The music had stopped, everyone staring, and Declan became aware of his throbbing knuckles and Petra's hand on his arm, firm and restraining. "We should go," she said quietly. "No." Samuel stepped forward, his face flushed with anger and embarrassment. "You stay. George is an ass, always has been. You are welcome here, both of you." Mary nodded fiercely, and Tom Henderson added his voice to the support, and slowly the tension drained as people went back to their celebrating. But the joy had soured for Declan, and when Petra tugged gently at his sleeve, he let her lead him away from the crowd, back toward the road home. They walked in silence for a while, the afternoon sun heavy on their shoulders. His hand hurt where he had connected with Thatcher's teeth, and he flexed his fingers experimentally, checking for breaks. "You did not have to do that," Petra said finally. "Yes, I did. He insulted you, insulted both of us. Words I have heard worse. That does not make it acceptable." He stopped walking and turned to face her. "You deserve respect. You have worked harder than anyone I know, and you helped Samuel without asking anything in return, and if people like Thatcher cannot see that, then they are blind." She looked at him with something complicated in her expression, gratitude and wariness mixed together. "You will make enemies defending me. People like George have friends and they remember slights. Then I will make enemies. I have done stupider things for worse reasons." He started walking again, and she fell into step beside him. "Besides, if the workshop plan works, I will need you too much to let idiots drive you away. If it works." She said it softly, but he heard the doubt underneath. "It will work. It has to." He surprised himself with the conviction, but once he said it, he knew it was true. The letter to Marcus Brennan had been sent, the die cast, and backing down now would be worse than failing boldly. 3 days later the reply came, and Declan read it twice to be sure he understood. Marcus Brennan remembered the favor, remembered Declan's father as an honest man and a skilled craftsman, and was willing to extend the existing loan deadline to the end of next year while advancing a modest sum for initial workshop setup. The terms were fair but firm. The business had to show profit by the extended deadline, or the farm and all improvements would be seized to cover the debt. It was a lifeline and a noose in equal measure, and Declan took it with hands that shook slightly. He showed Petra the letter that evening in the barn, and she read it with the same careful attention she gave everything, then looked up with fierce determination. "We can do this. If we start now, we can be ready before the heavy timber hauling begins in autumn." He raised an eyebrow. "You are planning to stay then? If you are paying fair wages and a share of the profits, I am staying." She folded the letter and handed it back. "Someone needs to keep you organized." The workshop consumed them through the rest of August and into September. They worked from dawn until dark, transforming the barn's interior into something functional and efficient. Declan built workbenches and tool racks while Petra constructed storage bins and lumber racks with joints so tight they needed no nails. They expanded the forge area, installed better ventilation, and whitewashed the walls to maximize light. The animals were moved to a smaller outbuilding, the hayloft converted to an office and material storage, and slowly the space became something professional. Money was tight. Every penny counted twice, but they scrounged and improvised and made things work. Petra proved to have a gift for negotiation, bargaining with suppliers for bulk discounts and salvaged materials with the same patience she had shown teaching Samuel his vows. Declan watched her charm a load of seasoned oak out of a sawmill operator who initially refused to sell to an orc, and felt a pride that was becoming uncomfortably close to something deeper. They worked side by side in the close heat, and he became familiar with the way she moved, economical and sure. Her strength applied with precision rather than brute force. Sometimes their hands brushed passing tools, or they stood close enough that he could smell the clean sweat and sawdust scent of her, and his awareness of her shifted from companion to woman. He caught himself watching the line of her neck when she bent over a measurement, the capable shape of her hands, the way her rare smiles changed her entire face. One evening in mid-September, taking a break from installing the last of the storage racks, they sat on the front step of the workshop drinking water and watching the sunset paint the western sky in shades of orange and gold. The air had cooled with the coming autumn and the light slanted long across the yard. "I have been thinking," Petra said, rolling the cup between her palms, "about partnership terms." "All right." He kept his voice neutral though his pulse jumped. "What did you have in mind?" "You own the land and the building. You provide the tools and initial materials. I provide labor and management." She looked at him directly. "Fair would be 60% to you, 40% to me, from net profits after expenses and loan repayment." It was more than fair, it was generous to her, and he knew from the set of her shoulders that she expected him to counter lower. Instead he said, 50-50. Equal partners. She blinked, surprise breaking through her composure. "That is not reasonable. You carry all the risk." "We both carry risk. If this fails, you lose your work and home same as me. You have put as much into building this as I have, and you will put as much into running it." He held out his hand. "Equal partners or no deal." She stared at his hand for a long moment, and he saw her throat work as she swallowed. Then she gripped his hand firmly, her calluses rough against his, and shook once. "Equal partners," she agreed, and her voice was thick with emotion she did not bother hiding. They opened for business the first week of October with a hand-painted sign on the road and word of mouth advertising through Tom Henderson's freight connections. The first customer was a timber hauler with a cracked wheel, and Declan repaired it while Petra managed the payment and scheduling. The second was a farm wife needing a replacement axle. The third a merchant whose wagon had thrown a rim 20 miles out and limped in desperate for help. Word spread. The timber road traffic proved as steady as Petra had predicted, and Declan's skills were solid enough that customers came back and brought friends. They worked long hours, sometimes late into the night by lantern light, and the rhythm of it became natural. Him at the forge or the lathe, her managing the books and customer relations, both of them troubleshooting the endless small problems of running a business. The first month they cleared enough to cover expenses and make a small payment on the loan. The second month they turned an actual profit, modest but real. By November, when the creditors would have originally come calling, they had a ledger showing steady growth and a queue of customers waiting for service. Marcus Brennan visited in December, inspecting the operation with a sharp eye and asking pointed questions about sustainability and growth projections. Petra presented him with 6 months of projected earnings based on current customer trends, and Declan showed him the quality of their work, wheels that would last a decade with proper care. Brennan left satisfied, the loan secure for another year, and Declan celebrated by splitting an apple pie with Petra in the warmth of the workshop while snow fell softly outside. "We did it," he said, still slightly disbelieving. "We actually pulled this off. We did." She licked pie filling from her thumb, unself-conscious. But the hard part comes next. Staying successful is harder than getting started. Ever the optimist. But he was grinning, high on relief and sugar and the warmth of shared accomplishment. Winter was slow season for wagon traffic, and they used the time to build inventory, crafting wheels and axles and replacement parts against the spring rush. The workshop stayed warm from the forge, and Petra moved her sleeping space from the barn loft to a small room. They partitioned off in the corner, insulated and heated, a real bedroom instead of a hay pile. Declan offered her use of the house, a spare room that had been his father's, but she preferred the workshop, like being close to the tools and materials. "Besides," she said, arranging her few possessions in the new space, "if someone tries to break in and steal our inventory, I will hear them." They settled into winter rhythms, work and meals and quiet evenings by the stove. Declan taught her to read better, helping her sound out complicated words in the newspapers he bought monthly from town, and she taught him more of her language, the grammar and structure that made it more than just harsh sounds. They played cards badly, cooked together because neither of them was skilled enough to manage alone, and existed in a comfortable domesticity that felt more like home than anything Declan had known since his mother died. The attraction that had been building all autumn grew harder to ignore. He would catch her watching him sometimes, her eyes dark and thoughtful, and he wondered what she saw. Did she feel this pull, this wanting that had nothing to do with partnership agreements and everything to do with the way her laugh made his chest tight? He did not know how to ask, did not know if asking would ruin the good thing they had built together. January brought deep cold and a blizzard that shut down the roads for a week. They were snowed in together, the workshop an island of warmth in a white wilderness, and the enforced closeness stripped away the last of the polite distance they had maintained. They talked for hours, sprawled on the floor in front of the stove, and he learned things. That she had grown up in a mountain clan that valued strength and survival above sentiment, that her mother had died in childbirth and her father in a human raid when Petra was 14, that she had been alone and working since before most humans left childhood. "Do you want to go back?" he asked. "To your clan, your people? No clan now. They scattered after the raid, went different directions looking for safety. I would not know where to find them." She said it without self-pity, just fact. "This is my place now, here with the work we are building." "I am glad." The words came out quiet but intense. "I know that is selfish, but I am glad you stayed." She looked at him across the stove's glow, her face half in shadow. "It is not selfish. I am glad too." The moment stretched, heavy with things unsaid, and he almost reached for her, almost closed the distance and risked everything. But she looked away first, banking the stove for the night, and the moment passed. Spring came slowly, the snow melting into mud and the roads turning to soup before they dried enough for wagon traffic. Business picked up as soon as the thaw allowed, and they were immediately slammed with work, repairs and custom orders and desperate travelers who had limped through winter on failing wheels. They hired a local boy, Martin Fletcher, to help with basic tasks and customer service, and the workshop hummed with activity from sunrise to sunset. Declan watched Petra manage it all with calm efficiency, and his feelings crystallized into something he could no longer ignore. He loved her. Loved her competence and her kindness, her rare smiles and her terrible card playing, the way she hummed tunelessly when she worked and always checked the animals before she slept. Loved her with an intensity that made the workshop feel empty when she walked to town for supplies, and full again when she returned. But confessing felt impossible. They were partners, equals, and the business depended on them working together smoothly. If he spoke and she did not feel the same, he would make things awkward, might drive her away, might ruin everything they had built. So he kept quiet and worked and loved her silently, and told himself it was enough. Late April brought Samuel and Mary Henderson to the workshop, asking for a custom wagon to celebrate their first anniversary. They glowed with happiness, Mary round with pregnancy, Samuel proud and protective, and seeing them made Declan's chest ache with want for something similar. "Petra taught me more than Vows," Samuel said while Mary browsed the wheel samples. "She taught me that keeping promises is work, daily work, and that work is what makes love last." "She is good at teaching," Declan agreed, watching Petra sketch wagon dimensions with Mary. "You should tell her," Samuel said quietly, and Declan's head whipped around. "Tell her what? That you love her. It is written all over your face every time you look at her." Samuel grinned at his expression. "I am not blind, and neither is half the settlement. The only question is whether you are going to do something about it. It is complicated. We are business partners." "So, my parents were business partners for 15 years before they admitted they loved each other. Wasted 15 years being stubborn." Samuel clapped him on the shoulder. "Life is short. Do not waste it." The words haunted him for days afterward. He would start to speak, catch Petra's eye across the workshop, and the words would die in his throat. She gave no sign of wanting more than they had, and he could not risk assuming. Then, on the 1st of May, he came back from town with supplies and found the workshop empty, the tools laid aside mid-project. He called for Petra and got no answer, and worry spiked through him before he heard sounds from behind the building. He walked around the corner and found her there, standing in the shade of the old oak tree, speaking quietly to herself. The words were Orc vows. He recognized them from the winter lessons, her voice shaping the harsh syllables with careful precision. "I bind my breath to yours. Where you go, I follow. What threatens you threatens me. Your hunger is mine, your shelter is mine, your fight is mine." His heart stopped, restarted, pounded so hard he thought she must hear it. She was practicing marriage vows alone in the same way she had practiced human vows for Samuel. But these were orc vows, her vows, and there was no community wedding coming that he knew about. She paused, started over, and he stood frozen, listening. I bind my breath to yours. Where you go, I follow. The pieces clicked together with painful clarity. She was not practicing for someone else. She was practicing for herself, learning the words the same way she learned everything, through repetition and determination. Learning them in hope, in preparation for a future she wanted but had not spoken aloud. His feet moved without permission, carrying him around the tree, and she looked up with wide eyes when she saw him. Declan, I did not hear you return. I just arrived. His mouth was dry, his pulse thunder in his ears. Those vows, are you preparing for something? She went very still, her expression guarded. I am practicing, like I practiced human vows. For whom? The question hung between them, sharp and necessary, and he saw her decide in real time whether to deflect or tell the truth. She chose truth. For you, in case you ever wanted to hear them. Her voice stayed steady, but her hands clenched at her sides. I know it is foolish. We are partners, and that is good, and I should not want more. But I do want more, and I thought if I learned the words, if I could speak them properly, maybe someday I could offer them and you might say yes. The relief and joy hit him so hard his knees went weak. You want to marry me? I want to bind my life to yours. Build something permanent together, not just a business but a family, a future. She lifted her chin, defiant even in vulnerability. If you do not feel the same, I understand. I will not make things awkward. We can continue as partners, and I will keep my feelings private. He closed the distance between them in 3 strides and took her face in his hands, gentle despite the trembling in his fingers. Petra Darkwell, I have been in love with you since the blizzard. Maybe before. I have been too scared to say it, too worried I would ruin what we had. He laughed, shaky and relieved. I want to marry you. Human vows, orc vows, every kind of vow there is. I want to build a life with you that lasts until the bones lie quiet and beyond. Her eyes shone suspiciously bright, and when she smiled, it was the full, unguarded version that transformed her face into something radiant. Then I should practice more. I want to get them perfect. Practice later. Kiss me now. She did, rising on her toes to meet him halfway, and the kiss was everything he had imagined and better, sweet and fierce and tasting of hope. When they broke apart, they were both grinning like idiots, and he rested his forehead against hers, breathing her in. How do we do this? He asked. There is no justice of the peace who will marry a human and an orc. We marry ourselves, speak the vows to each other and mean them. That is all marriage is, the speaking and the meaning. She pulled back enough to look him in the eyes. Unless you want a human ceremony, I want both. Your vows and mine, everything that binds us together, he thought for a moment. The workshop. We built it together and it represents our partnership. We could marry there among the tools and the wheels in the space that is ours. I would like that. She kissed him again, softer this time. When? As soon as you are ready. Tomorrow, next week, whenever you can speak the vows without practicing. I can speak them now. I have known them by heart for months. I was just nervous. She laughed, and the sound was pure happiness. Tomorrow, then. In the evening, when the day's work is done. They told no one, kept it private between themselves. The next evening, after Martin had gone home and the workshop was quiet, they cleaned up and changed into their best clothes. Petra wore the only dress she owned, simple blue cotton she had bought for the Henderson wedding and never worn since. Declan wore his father's wedding shirt, carefully preserved, and they stood in the center of the workshop surrounded by the fruits of their labor. The sunset light streamed through the western windows, painting everything gold, and Declan took her hands. You want to go first? He asked. I will. She took a breath, and when she spoke the words were clear and strong, no hesitation. I bind my breath to yours. Where you go, I follow. What threatens you, threatens me. Your hunger is mine, your shelter is mine, your fight is mine. Until the last fire goes cold and the bones lie quiet, I am yours and you are mine. The words settled over him like a benediction, and he blinked back the emotion that threatened to spill over. Then he spoke the human vows, the ones she had practiced for Samuel, but with her name instead. I, Declan William Emerson, take thee, Petra Rose Darkwell, to be my wedded wife, to have and to hold from this day forward, for better, for worse, for richer, for poorer, in sickness and in health, to love and to cherish, till death us do part. She was crying now, silent tears tracking down her green cheeks, and he wiped them away with his thumbs before kissing her again, sealing the promises they had made. They stood there in the golden light, married by their own words in the space they had built together, and it felt more real and binding than any official ceremony could have been. That night, they moved her things into the house, into his room, and made love with the tenderness of people learning each other for the first time. She was strong and sure, and he was gentle and reverent, and afterward they lay tangled together in the darkness, her head on his chest, his fingers tracing patterns on her shoulder. "Are you happy?" she asked quietly. "Happier than I have ever been. You?" "Yes." She tilted her head to kiss his jaw. "I did not think I would find this. Safety, partnership, love. I thought I would always be alone, always moving. You are home now. We both are." He held her closer, feeling the miracle of her solid and real in his arms. "Everything we build from here, we build together." The business continued to grow through the summer, their reputation spreading along the timber road and beyond. They were known as honest and skilled, the wheelwright and his orc wife who ran the best workshop in the valley. Some people disapproved, George Thatcher among them, but most of the community came to accept them, especially after Tom Henderson started sending all his freight business their way and vouching for their quality. By autumn, they had paid down a significant portion of the loan, and Marcus Brennan came to visit again, this time bringing a proposal. He wanted to invest in their expansion, helping them purchase additional equipment and hire more workers in exchange for a percentage of the profits. They negotiated carefully, Petra's head for numbers ensuring the terms stayed fair, and by winter they had signed a contract that would allow them to double their capacity by spring. Life settled into a rhythm of work and love and slow, steady growth. Declan taught Petra to read fluently, and she taught him enough orc language that he could hold simple conversations. They made friends in the community, hosted dinners where neighbors came to share food and stories, and slowly built the kind of roots that could not be torn up easily. 2 years after their private wedding, they held a public ceremony in the workshop for the community to witness. Samuel and Mary Henderson stood up for them, and Tom Henderson gave a speech about second chances and hard work, and even some of the people who had been skeptical came to celebrate. They spoke both sets of vows again, Declan in English and Petra in her native tongue, and the justice of the peace declared them legally married under territorial law. The celebration lasted until midnight, and when everyone had finally gone home, they stood in the workshop doorway watching the stars, Petra's hand resting on the gentle swell of her belly where their first child grew. "We did well," she said softly. "We did." He covered her hand with his, feeling the future kick gently against their palms. "Everything I thought I wanted, running away to the coast and starting over, it was nothing compared to this. You ever regret staying, choosing this life instead?" "Never." He turned her to face him, cupping her face with gentle reverence. "You saved me, Petra. This place, our partnership, our love, it saved my life and gave me purpose. I would choose it again every day." She kissed him, sweet and sure. Good, because I plan to keep you for a very long time. Their daughter was born in early spring, a healthy girl with her mother's green skin and her father's brown eyes. They named her Kira Rose Emerson, and she screamed her arrival with impressive lung power that had Declan and the midwife laughing while Petra cursed creatively in 2 languages. When they placed the baby in Petra's arms, both of them exhausted and tearful and overwhelmed, Declan felt his heart expand in ways he had not known were possible. "She is perfect," he whispered, stroking the tiny pointed ear that marked her heritage. "She is ours." Petra looked up at him with fierce joy. "Our daughter, our family." The workshop thrived, and so did they. They hired 3 more workers as the business expanded, including a young orc man who had heard about their operation and traveled 200 miles for the chance to work somewhere he would be treated fairly. They trained him in wheelwrighting, and he proved to have natural talent. And eventually he married Martin Fletcher's sister in a ceremony that blended human and orc traditions, because that was becoming normal in their corner of the valley. Kira grew into a bright, curious child who learned to walk among wood shavings and wheel rims, who spoke 2 languages before she was 3, and who had her mother's determination and her father's easy charm. When she was 4, Petra gave birth to their second daughter, Penny Grace, who was quieter than her sister but just as stubborn, and the workshop rang with children's laughter mixing with the sound of hammer and forge. The farm that Declan had been ready to abandon became prosperous land, the south field leased to a neighbor for grazing. The house expanded to accommodate their growing family. The workshop, a landmark that travelers sought out specifically. The debt to Marcus Brennan was paid off in full 6 years after they started, and they celebrated by commissioning a new sign. Emerson and Darkwell Wheelwrights, established 1843, family-owned and operated. On their 10th anniversary, Declan surprised Petra by taking her back to the old oak behind the workshop where he had first heard her practicing vows. They stood in the shade while the afternoon light filtered through new leaves, and he pulled a folded paper from his pocket. "What is this?" she asked, taking it carefully. "The letter I wrote. The one accepting the ship berth. I never sent it, but I kept it, and I want to burn it now. Put that ghost to rest completely." She read the letter slowly, her expression thoughtful. "You would have been good at that life, too. A wheelwright in a port city, you would have thrived. Maybe, but I would not have been happy, not the way I am with you." He produced a match and struck it, holding the flame to the paper's edge. "I choose this life, this family, you, today and every day." They watched the letter burn, the ashes scattering on the spring breeze, and when the last ember died, Petra pulled him down for a kiss that tasted of promises kept and future days stretching bright ahead. "I bind my breath to yours," she whispered against his lips. "Till death us do part," he whispered back. And in the workshop nearby, their daughters played among the tools that had built their family's fortune, their laughter ringing out across the land that had become, against all odds and through hard work and love, a true and lasting home.